Steve, one subject we neglected in the first segment was the impact of no party affiliated voters in Florida right now. I know you wrote a piece about it. Let's talk about that a bit.
Sure. Well, now you have a situation where almost 1 of every 4 voters who registers to vote in the state is turned off by both major parties, and they register NPA, no party affiliation. And so, that's the fastest growing part of the electorate. They now outnumber Democrats or Republicans in like 8 or 9 different counties, including the big ones, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. There are more NPA voters than there are Republicans in Miami. So what does that tell you? It tells you they're turned off by excessive partisanship. I've interviewed quite a few of these voters, and what they talk about is how disgusted they are with Washington. They don't follow Tallahassee as closely, but they're fed up with the do-nothing Congress and so forth. The big question is, will they vote? They've already made a decision that they don't like partisan politics, but they care enough to register. So they're a wild card because you don't know how many of them are going to vote or how they're going to vote. And pollsters don't focus on them. Pollsters tend to focus more on Democrats and Republicans.
Interesting. Would you call them independents, or does that idea come across as too traditional or whatever for these people?
In more than 30 years of covering politics in the state and going to the polls every election, people say, I vote for the person, not the party. And part of me says, really? Baloney. And here's why. Here's why I say that. Because partisan cues do matter. If you scratch an independent voter a couple of times, you'll find an issue that will motivate that person to either lean left or lean right. It could be anything, you know. But I think people, generally speaking, come down either one side or the other of this political center. Nobody's in dead center politically.
Okay. Let's talk about another very significant part of this election, or outcome of this election potentially. Marilyn, I'll start with you on this. Right now, there's a 75-45 split in the Florida House of Representatives between Republicans and Democrats. But a lot of different analyses of where races could go in this election would yield an outcome potentially of maybe as much as 80 Republicans versus 40 Democrats, which would be a veto-proof majority, which could prove problem for especially Governor Christ in terms of getting something done that he wants to get done, even also Governor Scott potentially. So let's talk about that a little bit. Marilyn, what comes to mind when you know that you're going to have a governor coming in that have a veto-proof House sitting over here, and how does one govern in this situation?
Well, first of all, it's going to be a given that because the race is so close and because we have this Libertarian Party candidate, Adrian Wiley, running strong, because as Steve mentioned, I think there's a lot of people turned off by both parties, so that Adrian Wiley is likely to pick up maybe double-digit numbers, which means that if Rick Scott is elected or Charlie Crist is elected, neither are going to be elected with a majority. More voters in Florida will have voted against them than voted for them. And so they come into office with a plurality of votes, and they don't have a mandate. They can't say, people voted for me because they like my platform. You said plurality. I want to make sure people, plurality, not that means majority. They got the most votes, but they didn't get the majority of the voters. All right. So what we have is this dynamic where that makes the legislature all-powerful. They have a weak governor, and what does that mean? We don't have any discussion of what that means. Neither candidate is talking about what their governing philosophy is going to be. We don't know how they're going to work with the legislature, and pretty much I think the legislature can call all the shots. And we don't know what the legislature's agenda is, which makes it I think, a very important unanswered question as we go into this important race. The other thing I think that is significant here is that we have the possibility that the legislature, as you mentioned, could have a veto-proof majority. And that means that if Charlie Crist comes in, will he just be completely unable to work at anything? Or does he have the leadership skills to bring people along? And to me, that's a question that we should hear them answer. Jim, I know you've been covering and looking at some of the races that could turn around the dynamics in the House to make it a veto-proof House for Republicans. Talk about some of those races.
Big picture, there are very few, relatively few, competitive races in the state, in the legislative races, in the House or the Senate. But I think the key is to watch the I-4 corridor in some of these House races. In Seminole County, Scott Plakin, a former House member, is trying to get back in the House. He's a Republican, very conservative Republican. He's running against Mike Clellan, a Democrat who beat Chris Dorworth, who was going to become House Speaker. Dorworth had a lot of ethical questions about him. Clellan, as a Democrat, beat him. Very big surprise. I mean, it was the biggest surprise of the last election cycle in the legislative races. So Plakin is running in that district, and that district performs Republican. So there's a possible pickup in Seminole County. There's 3 races in the Tampa Bay area that the Republicans are really pushing for. They're trying to unseat 3 freshman Democrats. Carl Zimmerman in a Pinellas County district, Dwight Dudley in a Pinellas County district, and Mark Danish in a Hillsborough district. The Republicans are outraising them in each of those districts, and Pinellas particularly traditionally has been a moderate Republican place, and so I think they have chances to win all 3 of those seats. Add those to Plakin, you got 4. They're also putting on a push in Miami-Dade County to try to take out another freshman Democrat, Jose Javier Rodriguez. I'm not sure, whether how that will play, but that's another possibility. There's a couple other wild card races in the I-4 corridor too. One of which is Karen Castor Dental, who is a freshman. She has a district that sort of goes Orange and Seminole counties. Republicans are making some noise about possibly competing there. Linda Stewart, who's another freshman Democrat in Orlando, the Republicans are making some noise about competing there. Republicans have a lot of resources they can pour into these races. Now, whether they can unseat these freshmen or not, I think it's obviously too early to tell. But there's going to be a lot of competition, particularly in I-4. Other parts of the state, there's really not that much to the House races. I mean, a lot of them were decided in the primaries, or they're just not competitive.
Are Democrats trying to unseat Republicans anywhere?
There really are not, at least that I can find, many examples of where the Democrats are really trying to take away Republican seats, particularly in the House. There's in the Senate, there's a Pinellas County district where the Democrats have made some noise about coming after Jeff Brandes, but he's got a ton of money, and he's also won a couple elections lately, so he's got some name ID. But the Senate races, there's even fewer than there are in the House. The marquee race is down in Broward and Palm Beach counties, where Ellen Bogdanoff, a Republican, is trying to get revenge and win back, defeat Maria Sachs, who beat Bogdanoff 2 years ago in a big money, nasty race.
Well, let's talk about let's move to the Congress. A race up here in the Panhandle, as we sit here in Tallahassee, that has gained national notoriety is between Gwen Graham, Democrat, daughter of former governor and United States Senator Bob Graham, and Steve Sutherland, a Republican incumbent. And I'm hearing and seeing some numbers that this race is close, and it could be a pickup for the Democrats. Who's been following this race?
I have.
Steve,
and
okay.
I saw Sutherland on the trail recently over in Panama City. Gwen Graham's a really good candidate and has good TV ads, and you're right, from an iconic Florida political name, but Bob Graham's been frankly out of the political scene for a little bit. However, much of this district is what I would call old Florida. This is a rural, conservative part of the state. When you get west of Leon and Gadsden County, that district gets pretty red. It should not be overlooked that Steve Sutherland knocked out an incumbent to win that seat. He knocked out a guy named Alan Boyd. And Sutherland, has the benefit of President Obama's unpopularity, which they're playing up in the district. It's a heavy military, it's conservative, small businesses. Then you've got the factor of Rick Scott and the Republican Party having to ramp up turnout in that part of the state. Why? To neutralize the anticipated fact that the Democrats are going to try to get a lot more voters out in South Florida. I mean, voters in Northwest Florida are overwhelmingly Republican. So that's where they're aiming some of their resources. And, either candidate could win, but I would give at the moment a slight edge to Steve Sutherland. Yeah.
Okay, let's turn our attention. We've about 2 minutes left to something else that's important on the ballot, and that are 3 proposed constitutional amendments. One has to do with setting aside dock stamp revenues, 33% of dock stamp revenues for 20 years to fund the purchase of environmentally endangered lands, primarily to manage water and clean up springs. Second, the so-called medical marijuana amendment that would legitimize the use of marijuana for certain medical purposes. And finally, an amendment that has to do with whether an incoming or outcoming governor gets to appoint judges. All right, who wants to take a real quick, we'll just go around the horn. We've got about 30 seconds, Jim. Which ones will pass?
I think the land and conservation one, it appears that that has a really good chance of passing.
All right, you named one of them, okay?
I think that too. I think that will pass. I think medical marijuana will fail.
Oh, okay, Mary Ellen?
And I think that voter confusion is what's going to kill any amendment. I think that land and water is not confusing. The other 2 perhaps are.
And Steve?
I feel the same way. I think Amendment 1 passes, and when voters are unsure, they tend to vote no.